Next, we're going to create our virtual machines. You can see there are 4 virtual machines we're going to create. A web server that's going to be called Apache, a Bastion host, which is going to be just called Bastion, and then an application server that's going to run PHP. We're just going to call it PHP, keep it simple, and then finally a database server that's going to be running MariaDB, and I'm just going to call it SQL. So the only one here that's probably not clear is this Bastion host. Basically, this is a machine. If you can see on our firewall, we're only going to allow TCP/22, which is SSH, to this Bastion host. And then from there, we'll be able to access any of the other machines within our virtual network. So we'll be able to access these private servers, we'll be able to access the web server. But no one will be able to SSH from the web server inbound to either one of these 2 servers. So it's a little bit more secure that way. So this is going to be our remote access server, essentially. So let's get started. I'm going to bring up the Google Cloud, and I'm going to go into Compute Engine, my virtual machines. And again, I have my project selected to ITAX 5217, so I have no machines in here yet. So I'm going to click on Create Instance. And you're going to do this for all 4 machines. We're going to use the exact same settings. So we're going to call it the first one Apache. Now, if you recall, we had to make sure that we set our regions. I've noticed that the region for me always comes up as US Central 1. Not entirely sure why. So I don't have to change it because it's already correct, but make sure you set the region to the same thing that you use for your virtual private network. They do have to be consistent. Then when you scroll down, for the different machines, we're going to use N1 because they are the cheapest machines. You can make a really small machine. We don't really need anything. So I'm going to do the standard core F1 micro. It's the smallest machine. You can see it costs $4.88 a month if you leave it running. Obviously, we're going to try to turn them off. It'll be even less. You can probably get away with less than $1 a month for this whole environment if you make sure you turn it off when you're done. For the boot disk, by default it's going to be Debian. I'm just going to change that to Ubuntu. And you certainly could use Debian if you like. Ubuntu and Debian are very similar, so it'll probably work. I'm just going to leave it on version 20.04 LTS. Balanced persistent disk, I'm going to change to standard just because it's a little bit cheaper. And 10 gigabytes is perfectly fine. We really don't need that much space for these VMs. Finally, the last thing, we don't want to change firewall because we're going to manage the firewall manually for this project. So you don't want to mess with these, otherwise it's going to create a bunch of rules and kind of make things confusing. But when you come down here to advanced options, you're going to open this up, and under networking, so for the network tag, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this one Apache. This will just make it easy to label it later on. And then network interface card you can just leave alone, but what I'm really looking for down here under network interfaces, I don't want to use the default network. Instead, I'm going to select that ITAX 5217 network that I created. And since this machine is in the DMZ, and I know that because I can look at my diagram, the web server which I'm creating, I want in the DMZ. So I'm going to make sure I select DMZ as the network. Everything else here we can leave the same, and then we're going to create this virtual machine. It's going to take a little bit of time for it to create. So now you can see this Apache virtual machine has been created. It has an internal IP address. It has what I expect, 10.10. something, in this case .2, and it also has an external IP. If I click on this little SSH button, it's going to pop up and we can SSH to it directly from the browser. So this might pop up where you have to authorize it using your Google account. And I'm in. So now I can access this virtual machine. So let's go ahead and create the other 2 virtual machines that are on the private network. So to do that, I'm just going to close that window. We're going to create another instance. And this is going to be very similar to what I did before, just going to give it a different name. So I'm going to start with PHP. Make sure I have the correct region selected. I don't have to change mine because I used US Central. Make sure I use N1 just like I did before. We're going to use micro. I'm going to change my boot disk. Select Ubuntu. Use standard persistent just because it's cheaper. Scroll all the way down to our advanced options. Under networking, I am going to give it a network tag. I'm just going to use the same as my label for the machine just to keep it simple. And likewise, I'm going to change my network from default to the iTax network I created. This machine's not going to be in the DMZ. Instead, it's going to be in the private network. And that's all I need. You're going to do this twice. Once for your PHP machine, and then you're going to do the same thing, but the label will be SQL. So one for PHP, another one for SQL. And finally, we just have to create that Bastion host, which we're going to use for remote access. So as I did before, I'm just going to call it Bastion. All the remaining options are going to be exactly the same as it was for the Apache system, except for the network tag, of course, will be Bastion. So I'm just going to go through here and set the other options. So an F1 micro, make it nice and small. Change my boot disk to a Ubuntu. Go down to my advanced, make sure I set my network tag to Bastion so I have a label for it that I can use later for my firewall rules. Change it to our iTax network. And this one will be in the DMZ. Now finally, our last step, we have all of our machines. We want to prepare them for the remote access. You can just hit the SSH button here to connect to your machine, and you'll have to do that the first time, but you're going to want to set these up so you can SSH to them directly without having to use Google's tool to SSH. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So first, go ahead and click on that SSH button and connect to your virtual machine. You may have to click Authorize for it to transfer your SSH keys, and then you'll be connected. So your first step is you're going to need to edit a text file to change some settings. Since you have to be root to access this file we want to edit, you have to prefix it with the sudo command, sudo. Then you're going to use vi to edit that text file, and then you can see the path here. It's /etc/ssh/sshd.conf. Hit enter. You should see a wall of text here. I think I may have put the wrong path. You can see I did put the wrong path. It looks like the config file is _config, not conf. So put the right path in and you'll see this file pop up. So I'm going to use my arrow keys to scroll down. If you've never used VI, it can be a little bit convoluted when you first try to use it, but we want to go down to password authentication. I'm going to hit the X button on my keyboard when I get to no, because I want to delete the N and the O for no here under password authentication. And then in order to add the word yes, you have to hit I, which is going to put us in insert mode. You can see the bottom, it now says insert, and I'm going to type yes. Then I'm going to hit the escape key. It's going to take me out of insert mode. I'm going to scroll down to challenge response. I'm going to hit X again to delete that no, hit I, which is for insert. Type yes, hit escape. It's going to take me out of insert mode. When you're no longer in insert mode, it's called command mode. I can hit the colon button on my keyboard, right? So shift to get to the colon. I'm going to type W for write. You can see it down at the bottom. If you're looking at my screen, it'll be at the bottom of the command screen here. So W is for write, Q is for quit, exclamation point means don't ask me if I'm sure I want to quit, which is a little bit faster, and hit enter. So that's going to update that config file. And now I want to restart that service. So I'm going to type sudo systemctl restart sshd. That's going to restart SSH. And now I need to set a couple things. First, I need to set the password for root. So I'm going to type sudo passwd is the command to change the password. I want to change it for root. And now I'm going to put in a new root password. Alright, so I've updated my password. Now I'm going to create a new account because I want to be able to log into this machine. So I'm going to type user add. I'm going to create an account called admin. And kind of best practice here, I like to not use common usernames. So I'm going to do, since this is my Apache server, I'll call it Apache admin. Oh, and I forgot because I have to prefix this with sudo because we don't have permission to add a user, so we have to use root. So that created the user. Next, I'm going to use the password command to set the password. Okay, now I have a password set. I'm going to make sure I document that password because I'm going to need it if I ever want to get back into this machine. But now I can test to see if that works. So I'm going to go ahead and just close this window. I'm going to copy the IP address. You can just hit this little button to copy. And now I'm going to try using the PowerShell to connect. So without using Google. So that's going to be the SSH command, my user, which in this case was Apache-admin, that IP address. Say yes to accept. See if it takes my password. There we go, I'm in. So that worked. So now I can access this machine directly with SSH without even having to go into Google. You're going to do the same thing on all 4 of your virtual machines, and then you'll be ready for the next step.